Lemon Amiga present. A Playguide video review. Sit back and enjoy the show.
Yes, it's another Lemon Amiga game guide and review. This time we're taking a look at Ninja Missions, which were created originally by Sculptured Software and distributed by Mastertronic. They appeared on the 8-bit systems in 1986, and so this is the Commodore 64 version that we can see, and we can see that it's a pretty basic flick-screen fighting game where we get to take on a number of enemies based on our fists and our feet, and sometimes some weapons that we can throw like shuriken stars and knives. On the screen we find a gateway with some nice rope and some tassels, and the graphics in the C64 version and the music is very well done, and the graphics certainly aren't blocky. So on this long hot summer that we seem to be enjoying, I thought we'd return to the Orient and play Ninja Mission. And yes, this is the 1987 Amiga conversion, which we'll be mainly reviewing here. And that was, well, released through Mastertronic. And this was designed by Steve Coleman of Sculptured Software, and not much is known about him. The music is, I think, a conversion from the Rob Hubbard original on the 8-bit systems, and you can see the converters of this game who converted this to the Amiga. Bruce Milner, again, no information about these guys. Maybe this was their only game. So let's press fire, let's check this game out. Ninja Mission first appeared on the Atari 8-bit systems under the name of Ninja, and that was still Ninja on the Commodore 64, but by the time we reached the Amiga it's known as Ninja Mission. And you can see this 1987 update, it has better graphics and also slightly better playability. The premise of the game is very similar to those original 8-bit games, and it has an 8-bit feel. Takes place over 5 physical levels. The bottom level, which we are playing now, is sea level, and you can see on the gateway screen what look like hands waving around, blowing around in the wind. The first tactic is to collect all the weapons and to launch those at the enemy, and when that fails we'll have to use hand-to-hand combat, and sometimes we can even pull out a sword and we can do roundhouse kicks and high kicks and low kicks and punches and things like that. So I think the control mechanism is fairly simple, certainly a lot simpler than IK+. But even so, we can perform a great range of manoeuvres and actions against our enemies, and we can even forward flip and I think back flip as well, so there is no end to the talents of this ninja. Cleared ground level, we can then move on to level 2, which is the entrance hall, and just like those Bruce Lee movies, it's our job to move through the pagoda from the bottom all the way up to the very top, and when we get to the top we'll face a boss. The enemies do pose some kind of a challenge, and they are smart enough to pick up weapons and throw them against us, and that is good because that at least poses a challenge. And that's good because this is only a very short game, and maybe you can complete it in maybe 7 minutes, maybe 10 minutes if you are walking through the game. And there are maybe only 20 screens in it, but I think the background graphics are very well drawn and it's a nice update, and I think with those moves and the gameplay mechanics on offer, it's very simple, but the player can get stuck in and attack these enemies, which is the main part, and have some fun, even though they might be admiring the severed hands in the landscape. Another aim of the game is to collect up a certain number of red pots, and having collected all those, that should summon the end of game boss, and those red pots will also award us some energy as well, so we can replenish our energy, and those pots appear at random on the game, so every time you play it you'll have to explore every single room and pick up all of those on your way up to the top of this. Is actually a lot harder than it looks on the Amiga, and I've completed the Commodore 64 version pretty regularly, but the main Amiga version, which you're seeing right now, it still contains that playability and is sometimes pushover, but most of the time you'll have to hang back and selectively use your weapons and your skills, and don't just march straight in there. But hopefully if you can collect enough of those pickups, then you can simply launch those into the enemies and they will die without you having to even waste any of your own energy defeating them. Tackle these rooms in any order, and we can even skip out enemies and rooms altogether if we like, but one of the downsides is sometimes the game will take some time to load, and that's not really fair given that all of these screens should have fitted inside the Amiga's memory. And so we have found our first pot on this playthrough, and yes, that gives us a meagre amount of energy, and we can see that appears on the bottom of the screen. The game does contain a number of bugs carried over from the original versions, namely some of the pickups can get lost inside the graphics, and so you might have to search through those dead bodies to pick up all the weapons. And maybe that's a feature of the game, but sometimes you can lose weapons by not picking those up, and also by throwing those off the screen, because you will not get those back. And when we find the next screen, sometimes we'll find some free pickups, but none of the knives that I threw, unfortunately, and we do get another pot, so we do get some extra health back after all this. Or maybe not. And so we move on to another release. Sculpted Software actually released this game in the arcades as Ninja Mission, the arcade machine, and that was developed and released by Arcadia Systems, which was a branch of Mastertronic. You can see some of the Arcadia Systems games are listed on my workbench, and because those are all based on the Amiga 500 chipset, yes, they basically parked an Amiga 500 inside an arcade cabinet and released Amiga games in the arcades. You can see some arcade favourites are here, and they're all arcade perfect, of course, because they are arcade ROMs which happen to run on the Amiga. Anybody with an Amiga or even emulation can run these, so I would certainly recommend checking these out, and these, as I say, are arcade perfect. When we try to run the games, that will then boot into an Arcadia emulator, which will then boot the ROMs and then use the Amiga hardware to run the game. Unfortunately, Arcadia was an American franchise, and so all these are NTSC games, and so if you try to run those on a PAL system, I found that the game refused to load and quit out with an error. And so it's the first time I've actually seen NTSC games which actually refuse to load unless you boot those from an NTSC setup. And that's pretty good because it means that we get to play these as the designers intended, because we'll have to reset the machine. And yes, I've tried any number of tool types and NTSC variants to try to get this running on a PAL machine. It absolutely refused to work, so the only alternative is to reset and try an NTSC setup, and let's see how far we can get with this. And hopefully it will find the ROM and then it will boot from the arcade machine. The arcade version was developed by Sculptured Software and released by Mastertronic's Arcadia Systems arcade systems in America, and as you can see from the track screens, it's a very similar game to the original Amiga. And yes, in the arcade machine all of the Amiga components were in there, so this basically is a redesigned game based on a coin box to give us credits. And if we leave the introduction to roll, we can see all the different maneuvers, and just like IK Plus, it does give us a range. And let's just press that fire button and let's check the arcade version out. You can see that this is even better drawn than the original Amiga version, and it gives us an objective straight from the start. Now no longer do we need to collect pots, but now tokens, and those idols that we need to collect will give us a lot of extra power. With a clear mission in front of us to collect all of those idols, you can see the hands in the background still look like hands, but now they are wearing marigolds. There are no inter-screen captions, which is a blessing, and of course the other thing about this game is it includes voice samples, or at least digitized effects taken from movies. Given that this is basically an Amiga 500 inside an arcade cabinet, there is absolutely no reason for those omissions, so it just appears that the original release was rushed and this one had some time taken over it to appear nice and funky. So now that we've cleared all of that bottom level and it gives us a helpful arrow to progress, we have our route clearly laid out, and all we need to do is clear the rooms and make our way through the building. You'll still have to search those bodies in case you find any more weaponry, but with the health pickups it certainly gives the player a leg up, and it means that progress is rewarded. It means we can clear out these screens one at a time, and we can take on all of these enemies, or even avoid the enemies, and hopefully if we can collect enough pickups, that means our progress is made much easier throughout the rest of that game. And yes, I really should have checked those dead bodies just to see if there was anything in there. But if in doubt, why not perform some light gymnastics? The music is a little bit low on the arcade version, as it would be, and the sound effects are pretty high, which means anybody who played this or got to play this on the Arcadia systems will have remembered the great sound effects. And you can see every single room has been recreated with nice shadows, nice water effects, plus a lot more, and it seems a lot easier than both the C64 and the Amiga version. I really appreciate the detail that went into these rooms, the textures on the floor, and even the little extra signs and fans, which give this a little added dimension. And just like IK Plus, they've given a few things some shadows, which adds some kind of depth. And as for the gameplay, it's really simple, so the player can get stuck in, and they don't have to draw back and worry like the Amiga version that they are going to run out of health at any given moment. I think the artistic detail in this version is amazing, you can see on these screens, and that really adds a lot to the game, and this feels like a finished version. And this is the port that we really should have got on the Amiga, and this is the port that you can play on the Amiga right now. That's the final room of the game, and that's the final collectible, but unfortunately we did not collect that, and so we did not summon the boss and complete the game. But that's Ninja Missions on the Amiga. Taking a look at the scores, the highest score came from the Lemon Amiga database at 64%, Dato Magazine gave this 60%, and Commodore User gave the Amiga version 3 out of 10, and C64 4 out of 10, and the Arcadia version actually got a 7 out of 10 on the Lemon Amiga database. So maybe 5 out of 10 as an average score for the original Commodore Amiga version, and maybe a 7 out of 10 for the update. And I think this update is definitely worth checking out. It's so much more fun, and it doesn't take itself anywhere near seriously like the other versions. We can choose to continue from where we left off. In this case it's the final screen of the game, but with those odds I really don't think that I'll be able to master it. So let's leave the countdown to tick on through, and the game even provides us with some jolly music to insert the coin to prompt us to continue.